Hello there, thrill seekers. You want a thrill? Check out this shirt. The Three Stooges Nyuk Among Us. Oops. Can you see it all? Nice, huh? Alright, I have been reading Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi lately, and I never have done a video specifically about Sri Ramana Maharshi, so I thought I'd take a stab at it. So, in case you haven't heard of him, the sort of main book, the one that seems to pop up all the time, I think this is the first one I read, The Teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi, Be As You Are. I believe it has a different cover nowadays. I think I first found this at a bookstore called Shelley's Book Bar in Kent, Ohio, where I went to university, and where I first met Tim McCarthy, my Zen teacher, and I probably found the book before I met Tim, and I found it very influential. This is not that copy. I've long since lost that copy, but I bought one off of, I don't know, the internet somewhere. And I'll just read you the first paragraph of the introduction because it kind of tells you a little bit of biographical stuff about who this guy was. In 1896, a 16-year-old schoolboy walked out on his family and, driven by an inner compulsion, slowly made his way to Arunachala, a holy mountain and pilgrimage center in South India. On his arrival, he threw away all his money and possessions and abandoned himself to a newly discovered awareness that his real nature was formless, immanent consciousness. His absorption in this awareness was so intense that he was completely oblivious of his body and the world. Insects chewed away portions of his legs, his body wasted away because he was rarely conscious enough to eat, and his hair and fingernails grew to unmanageable lengths. After 2 or 3 years in this state, he began a slow return to physical normality, a process that was not finally completed for several years. His awareness of himself as consciousness was unaffected by this physical transition, and it remained continuous and undimmed for the rest of his life. In Hindu parlance, he had realized the self. That is to say, he had realized by direct experience that nothing existed apart from an indivisible and universal consciousness which was experienced in its unmanifest form as beingness or awareness, and in its manifest form as the appearance of the universe. So that's the start of his story, and he basically went on to live in this ashram on that hill. I suppose that's the hill in the picture. Where else would it be? But I didn't realize that until just now. And taught, and he met a guy named Paul Brunton, who, I'm not sure if Paul Brunton was British or American. Anyway, he was from an English-speaking country, and he sort of discovered Ramana Maharshi and started making Ramana Maharshi's teachings available to the English-speaking world, and that's how he kind of became famous among us non-Indian people. So the book I first showed you is sort of the main book most people know. It's the most common book, and then this, I guess, might have been the first book in English written about him. I just got it recently. And then there's this book that's hanging around. I actually got this at my wedding. There was a little shop at the place where my wedding happened, and they happened to have this book, and I was like, oh, that's neat, a little tiny book of Ramana Maharshi's teachings that I haven't seen before. I haven't really looked at it. My wedding was in June. I still haven't looked at this, but anyway, this is pretty easy to find, and it looks like a pretty good compendium. It looks like a reprint of one of the older compendiums. Oh, it is a collection culled from 3 works: Who Am I?, Spiritual Instructions, and Maharshi's Gospel. So there you go, that's what that is. But the one I've been looking at lately is this one, big fat book that I originally borrowed from my friend Piruz Kalea, and then, well, this is actually, I bought a copy for myself, and then Piruz moved away, so I haven't given him his copy back yet, but Piruz, if you're watching, I've got it, so anytime we can figure out how I can give it back to you. But anyway, so yesterday I was looking at page 154 of this book. It just happened to be the page I was on, the next page to read, and it's a continuation. These are dated dialogues, and it looks like he talked a lot, on some days, and talked not so much, or maybe not much was recorded. But the entry for July 20th, 1936 is pretty long. And what happens on page 154 I thought was interesting because it has a lot of parallels to Zen. So I'll just read you page 154. The questioner asks, how to know the self? And if this questioner may be... No, I'm wrong. The questioner is not identified in this one. Okay. So we don't know who the questioner is. Sometimes the questioners are identified and sometimes they aren't. How to know the self? A lot of these questions are put that way. They're not really grammatically correct questions, but anyway, you get it. How to know the self? Question mark. Ramana Maharshi says, are there two eyes? How do you know your own existence? Do you see yourself with these eyes? Question yourself. How does this question arise? Do I remain to ask it or not? Can I find myself in a mirror? Because your outlook has been outward bent, it has lost sight of the self. They're putting self in a capital S, and I suppose they mean Atman. In the we could talk about what Atman means, because it means a lot of things. It has lost sight of the self, and your vision is external. The self is not found in external objects. Turn your look within and plunge down. You will be the self. This I found interesting because it's quite reminiscent of what Dogen says in Fukan Zazengi. This is Nishijima and Cross's translation. We should learn the backward step of turning light and reflecting. Body and mind will naturally fall away, and the original features will manifest themselves before us. If we want to attain the matter of the ineffable, we should practice the matter of the ineffable at once. And I really feel like what Ramana Maharshi says in this quote and what Dogen says in that quote are basically the same thing. Also, interestingly enough, that bit about the eyes, Nagarjuna says something quite similar to that. Seeing does not perceive itself, its own form. How can that which does not perceive itself see others? So that's quite interesting there. So we have some parallels with the Zen and the Buddhist outlook, although Ramana Maharshi he doesn't seem to have been influenced by much of anything. When he was 16 years old, he had this weird experience, and you just heard what it was, and very intense, obviously, and went on for years. But it doesn't seem to have been precipitated by some kind of reading or study or anything like that. It just kind of came on by itself. So, let's continue. The unknowable, this is the questioner, the unknowable can be attained only by the grace of the unknowable. Ramana Maharshi answers, he helps the attainment, that is the grace. Questioner, how to check the mind? Another one of these grammatically incorrect questions. It bugs me. But anyway, let's keep going. Ramana Maharshi says this, will a thief betray himself? Will the mind find itself? The mind cannot seek the mind. You have ignored what is real and are holding on to the mind which is unreal and trying to find what it is. Was there mind in your sleep? It was not. It is here now. It is therefore impermanent. Can the mind be found by you? The mind is not you. You think you are the mind, and therefore ask me how it is checked. If it is there, it can be checked, but it is not. And this reminds me of the old story, I think, oh my gosh, some Buddhist scholar's probably going to ding me on this, but I think it's attributed usually to Bodhidharma, or maybe it's one of Bodhidharma's disciples, where somebody says, can you pacify my mind? And I think it's Bodhidharma says, okay, show me your mind. And then the guy says, well, I can't. And Bodhidharma says, there, I've pacified it for you. Old Buddhist story, sorry, I can't remember who to attribute it to. Understand this truth by search. Search for unreality is fruitless. Therefore, seek the reality, i.e., the self. That is the way to rule over the mind. There is only one thing real. Nishijima Roshi used to say, truth is only one. So that's quite similar there, too. The person asks, what is the one real thing? And he answers, Ramana Maharshi answers, that is what is. The others are only appearances. Diversity is not its nature. You probably get all mobbed for saying that on Twitter, but anyway, I think he means something else. We are reading the printed characters on paper, but ignore the paper, which is the background. Similarly, you are taken up by the manifestations of the mind and let go of the background. Whose fault is it? The questioner says, is there a limit to the self? Maharshi answers, what is the self? So he wants to know what this person means when they say self. The person says the individual soul is the self. That's a common belief in India, so we're describing the Atman. But so just to give you a taste of how Ramana Maharshi's understanding of Atman is different, here we go. What is the individual soul? Is there any difference between the two, or are they identical? Any new appearances are bound to disappear. Anything created will certainly be destroyed. The eternal is not born, nor does it die. We are now confounding appearances with reality. Appearance carries its end in itself. What is it that appears newly? If you cannot find it, surrender unreservedly to the substratum of appearances, then the reality remains as a residue. That's a kind of a funny way to put it. I think I get what he means, but I feel like maybe this got a little garbled in translation. But look at what's beyond any sort of appearance, is what I think he's saying. And now here comes another little Zen Q&A. What happens to a man after death? The questioner asks, and Ramana Maharshi answers, engage yourself in the living present. The future will take care of itself. Do not worry about the future. The state before creation and the process of creation are dealt with in the scriptures in order that you may know the present. Because you say you are born, therefore they say yes and add that God created you. But do you see God or anything else in your sleep? If God is real, why does he not shine forth in your sleep also? You are always, now, the same as when you were in sleep. You are not different from that one in sleep. But why should there be a difference in the feelings or experiences of the two states? Did you ask while asleep the question regarding your birth, or where do I go after death? Why think of all these now in the wakeful state? Let what is born think of its birth and the remedy, its cause and ultimate results. What is birth? Is it of the I thought or of the body? Is I separate from the body or identical to it? How did this I thought arise? Is the I thought your nature, or is anything else of your nature? This is Ramana Maharshi asking his questioner these things. And the questioner says, who is to ask these questions? And Ramana Maharshi says, exactly, that is it. There is no end to it all. Who is asking these questions? My first Zen teacher, Tim, used to say, if you asked him certain questions, he'd go, who's asking? And that was, I think, the best. I should write a book called Who's Asking? And then the questioner says, are we then to keep quiet? Doubts cease when the confusion is suppressed. Questioner, your statements amount to cessation of investigation. He says, Ramana Maharshi says, if Atman Vichara, self-investigation, ceases, Loka Vichara, world investigation, takes its place. And people are laughing. I'm not sure exactly that joke. Engage in self-investigation, then the non-self will disappear. The self will be left over. This sounds a lot like what Dogen says. This is self-investigation of the self. The one word self is equivalent to the body, the mind, man, individual, and the supreme, and all else. Pretty interesting stuff, and just struck me that that was one of the most Zenist things I've seen from Ramana Maharshi. So Ramana Maharshi, he's another one of these Advaita teachers whose philosophical stance comes out sounding a lot like Zen, and his practice was, as with a lot of the Advaita teachers, is just to kind of sit there and let people ask him questions, which is something I've done from time to time with mixed results, and every once in a while I think maybe I should start doing that as a practice and see where it goes. But that tends to be the way this is taught. The one thing that Ramana Maharshi doesn't get into this too much, but the one sort of difficult aspect always for me of the Advaita tradition is the idea of surrender to the guru. We don't have that in the Zen tradition. We don't have this idea that you surrender to the guru and you just believe everything the guru says and accept it. I think if your guru is somebody like Ramana Maharshi or Nisargadatta Maharaj or some of these people, that probably works out just fine. But of course, I think anybody who's looked at the nature of religions and authority and so forth can see how that can go terribly wrong. And it's probably not a good approach especially for Americans who have a whole culture that's based on rejecting authority, although I see some stuff here that makes me think America is starting to become very authoritarian these days, but let's leave that behind and not get into that in this video. But I think in general there's a kind of rejection of authority, and it makes it difficult for us to accept authority even when we want to, even when we might know that it's good for us. So, I think you have to be receptive. With my teachers, I had resistance, but I trusted them. So there was a lot of trust involved. And because I had total trust in Tim and total trust in Nishijima Roshi, I was able to kind of, progress is a dirty word in Zen, but let's say progress along the path that they provided because I had trust in them. If you don't trust your teachers, you won't be able to progress. And again, progress is a dirty word, but I'm using it. What's the word? I don't know. I'm using it for now. Toriaizu would be the Japanese word. Sorry, it's one of these cases where I can think of the Japanese word, but I can't think of the English word. Anyway, toriaizu, which means for the time being, just for the sake of what I'm saying, I'll use the word progress. And it's only possible with trust in your teacher. And trust doesn't mean blind trust, and it doesn't mean that you kind of set yourself up in a way that is going, that is sort of an idea that, okay, from this moment on, no matter what this guy does, I'm going to trust it. It's not like that. It's an understanding like the understanding I think that Ziggy has with me. And I think Ziggy understands that I'm not going to do anything bad to him. So even though I am a bit scary to him sometimes, like I've been training him. Well, we've been taking him to dog training classes. And there's a collar you got to put on him, which is a collar that tightens, and the dog trainer explained and showed how this does not choke the dog, because that's one thing you're always worried about, is choking the dog. It doesn't actually choke them because their throat is deeper in their neck than ours is. Didn't know that. So it doesn't actually choke the dog, but it works for training. And anyway, he doesn't like getting that collar put on. So I have to approach him gingerly and make sure he understands that, look, I'm not going to do something bad to you. And when he understands that, he'll allow me to put the collar on him. He probably wouldn't allow most people. My wife has trouble getting the collar on him, but she can do it. But I don't think anybody but me and her could even attempt it. It's because of trust. And it's that kind of trust. And Ziggy doesn't... Ziggy's still, he is aware that I could hurt him, but he chooses to place trust in me because he's had enough experience that shows him that's okay to do. Sorry I'm going on long with this, but I think this is an important point. So it's that kind of trust, that's the kind of trust I had with my teachers. I don't like to compare myself to a domesticated dog, but in a way I was like a domesticated dog. I trusted them the way a dog trusts its master, which is not to say that it's unconditional total submission, but it's a deep trust. Does that make sense? So you got to be careful with that, and I think this is why the Zen stream basically just rejects this whole idea of submission like that. But if trust is not established in some other way, other than submission, then it's just not going to work out. there you go. That's my little spiel for the day about that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I went on way too long about Ramana Maharshi and trust and everything, so I'm going to cut it here. But if you want to support me, you can go, let's see, let's put it the right way. You can go to hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. Ziggy is barking at my father-in-law. And that's where you'll find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main way of making a living, and I thank you for your support. But as always, this is offered for free. Ziggy, hold on, and take it for free if you want. Anyway, Ziggy's barking, so have a good time all the time. See you later. Bye. Hey Ziggy, what's going on? What's going on? What's the scary man doing? Is he doing something with leaves? Are you gonna go see him?